Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Information Podcast. My name is Norman Rangel, your host, and I'm excited today to welcome to the program Ben Westcott. And Ben is a firefighter and paramedic with the Hurst Fire Department in Hurst, Texas. I've known Ben for a little over a year and a half, maybe, and I had the privilege of being their oldest son's principal. And Ben, welcome to the program. If you could, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what things were like for you growing up. How did you become or decide to become a firefighter? And just share with us about yourself.
Man, I really appreciate you bringing me on. You have to be careful the way you ask that question about telling you about myself, because we could be here for hours.
I'm sure you've got a very interesting story.
I've got quite a few stories, and I've been accused of talking too much at points in my life. No, like you said, I work for the Hurst Fire Department. I've been a firefighter paramedic for 18 years now. I started into the beginning of school as far as you have to go through EMT school first, and then you go to paramedic and fire academy. So I was 2 weeks after graduation from high school, I was enrolled in the EMT class. My mother tells me that she knew I was going to be a fireman since the time I was about 4 years old. I was obsessed with fire trucks. She tells a story. It was probably in the early 90s. She's driving one of those giant square body Suburbans going down the freeway. And she said that she kept looking in her mirrors because she thought she was getting pulled over because she could hear a siren. She's like, I was either getting pulled over or there's a fire truck coming. And she goes, after about the third or fourth time that I heard it, she goes, I realized that you were sitting in the back seat making the siren noise, and it was realistic. So she said from that point forward, she knew I was going to be a fireman. But I've been doing it ever since. I'm a third generation firefighter.
Wow. Dad,
when his college days there in Keene, he joined the fire department and was given free room instead of the dorms if he would join the fire department. So he was the assistant chief there. His father was a firefighter as well as the town marshal in upstate New York, in a small town of Floresville, New York. So I guess it's just kind of in the blood. I knew that that's what I was going to do, and went for it.
That's tremendous. Third generation, and just decades of community service. So tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So married for 16 years. My wife's name is Patricia. We actually met on a mission trip through the church down in the Dominican Republic. She lived here. They went to the church in Fort Worth. And her mother, being a nurse, had heard about this mission trip, and I had just gotten my paramedic. And the pastor of our church was the guy that was putting the trip on. So he had invited me to go, said it'd be a great learning opportunity, and that's where we met. Came back, we started dating. We dated for 2 years, got married, and 6 years later, we had my first man child, Aiden, who is he's 9 now. And then a few years after that, along came my second man child, Bruiser. Rylan, and he's 5, and he just started school this year in kindergarten there with his brother. So it's been fun watching them go to the same school and seeing all the tiffs and the arguments like my brother and I used to have growing up and that kind of thing. And that's great. We live out in the country, got places outside for them to roam and ride go-karts, and we have a fantastic family.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed being around both of your kids, even though I didn't have Rylan at school yet, but they're just such a joy to be around. And you and Patricia should be very proud, and y'all are doing a fantastic job raising men children.
That's right. I appreciate that.
So, you know, firemen do more than rescue kittens from trees, and you do more than putting out fires.
Sure.
I mean, you guys respond to practically every call that a police officer would get. You know, it just seems that way. But you know, is that kind of accurate, or?
Yeah, it's pretty much the way the fire department works is basically we're the world's largest insurance policy. Cities, counties, districts that employ firefighters, they spend a lot of their budget every year basically on an insurance policy, which is police, fire, and EMS. And the responsibility that comes along with that is able and willing to respond to anything you call us for. Yes, we've been called for cats in trees, kids in trees,
Yeah.
you know, kids stuck in play equipment. And then, of course, as you'd expect, you know, there's the fires, whether that's in a building, a car, wildland fires, commercial fires, those types of things. And then through time, fire department had progressed to the point where it was pretty much an all hazards response. So currently, in my position as a firefighter and the station that I'm assigned to there in Hurst, we provide fire suppression. You know, we do the ambulance as well. So anything medical or trauma related, anything from delivering babies to CPR and gunshot wounds and all of those things. My station is also the technical rescue station. So we do high angle rescue, trench, confined space, vehicle and extrication from machinery. You name it. If somebody can get stuck in it or hurt themselves on it, then we'll go to it.
Wow.
It's a very interesting job because there's so many different aspects of it that it's impossible to get bored with it. It's nonstop.
Over the last few years, do things seem to be different than when you first started as a fireman? Is there anything in particular that y'all seem to be called out more for than in years past?
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes. There's a saying about the fire department that it was in a movie, and they were talking about the Chicago Fire Department, and on the wall there's a sign that says 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress, which is kind of a funny thing because most firemen don't like change. You know, they like the way things are, but it's constantly evolving. Recently, the big uptick that we have had is with medical type calls. Our ambulance is 10 times busier. Where our city usually runs about 95% EMS and car wrecks. The fires, we've kind of worked ourselves out of a job with prevention and sprinkler systems and, you know, all those types of things. Along the lines of medicals, one of the things that we're seeing a huge uptick in is due to the lack of medical insurance. People still need help. They still need medical care. They still need emergency interventions sometimes. Even sometimes it's not emergency interventions. They just need prescription medications that they're out of. With the insurance, the way that it works and the prices that go along with it, people can't afford it. They can't afford their prescriptions. They can't afford the bills that go along with it as far as primary care with a physician's office. So they wait until things are bad, until illness gets critical, and then they can just call an ambulance and we will show up regardless of your ability to pay. It's not even a question that we ask.
Yeah.
We don't even ask for their insurance information. We have a billing company that handles all that stuff later. Our primary goal is just to take care of them. So we get a lot of, people that are out of medications for hypertension, diabetes, respiratory illnesses. And then you take them to the hospital, and an emergency room is legally obligated to treat them and stabilize that patient, regardless of the ability to pay.
Right.
So it's become a vicious cycle. There's not as much money coming in, so prices go up. But something's got to be done to help these folks, so they call the fire department.
Yeah. Wow. So you're like a mobile hospital.
Yeah. So most ambulances are what they call a mobile intensive care unit, or an MICU.
Yeah.
If you see that on the side of the ambulance, that's what it stands for. We have almost all capabilities that emergency room does, besides the ability to do lab work, X-rays, CTs, those types of things. But anything after that, we can do surgical airways. We do chest darts on trauma patients. We can do pericardial centesis for people that are having trauma to the heart. It's the scope of the paramedic is vast compared to what it was.
Wow. It's interesting that you mentioned that y'all have almost worked yourselves out of a job as far as like fires are concerned. But you guys have been no less busy due to just all the medical things going on. And let me ask you this: what about overdoses? Have you seen an uptick in overdoses in the past few years?
Huge. The opioid crisis is big. We're seeing a lot of heroin use. Initially, it was just an uptick in the amount of calls that we were running for overdoses. And that quickly morphed into something that was even worse. Was we were seeing the overdoses, but the overdoses that we were seeing were much worse. And what I mean by that is in the past, we would use Narcan for overdoses on opioids. Right. It would usually take about 0.25 to 0.5 milligrams of Narcan to be able to get somebody to where their respiratory drive was back. They may not be completely alert and talking to you, but they were at least breathing on their own. That's the number one problem with those overdoses, is it shuts down your respiratory system. It got to the point to where we had to increase the amount of Narcan that we were keeping on the ambulance, because I've run overdoses that instead of what used to be 0.5 milligram is taking up to 4 to 6 milligrams just to get them to breathe. So the potency of the drug is insane. It is off the charts. And the folks that are overdosing on this, of course, when they wake up, there's two responses. They're either extremely grateful or they deny everything. But there's some science that kind of goes into why these drugs are more potent. It kind of comes in rashes when you see the more potent stuff. We had one of our patients tell us that he bought that he knew that he bought it, that it was what they refer to as killer dope. And killer dope is apparently a sales tactic for a lot of these drug dealers, that they'll get out there and they know that they have some stuff that's lethal, but that's better bang for your buck. So people will purposely buy it so that they can get more out of it, but it's too much.
Wow.
And they said that when these dealers will sell off, they'll sell 2 or 3 amounts of this killer dope, and within a week their entire product is gone because everybody wants killer dope. So it's a sales tactic that they're using. They know that if they kill off a couple of their regular customers, that they can sell everything they got and get more money.
Wow, that's just sick, you know.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's something that we're hearing, you know, more about in the news. Uh, to actually know somebody who has to deal with this, you know, from a treatment aspect, it just kind of makes things sink in a little bit more.
sure.
So, with your position, I'm sure throughout the years, um, you've had countless situations, call outs to just intervene and treat in very traumatic situations. And, you know, situations that are not only traumatic for the people that are needing your help, but I I can imagine that it would take a toll on the actual responders to those situations. Can you talk a little bit about that on
Absolutely.
on a personal level or?
Sure. It is a crisis right now amongst first responders. The past 5 years, they've had more first responder suicides than they
Wow.
have had first responders that died in the line of duty performing actions. Um, it's a crisis. For the longest time, first responders just kind of looked away and pretended it wasn't happening. To the point to where it wasn't till about 10 years ago that they even kept statistics on it nationally. They would just cover it up, because that was just something we didn't talk about. This job, the job of being a first responder, inherently draws alpha personality type people. They're not all alphas, but a lot of them are. It's a very competitive atmosphere
Hmm.
when you're in those types of jobs. And that in itself kind of bred into we don't show weakness. And
Right.
for the longest time, anything like that was you were considered weak for having feelings, because they would just teach you suck it up and do your job. That's what you're there for, which is true. Somebody has to suck it up and do that job, but they weren't teaching anything about how to manage that stress or that trauma after the job was complete. Um, I personally dealt with this because I was much like everybody else from EMT school and fire academy on. It was bad stuff's going to happen. People don't call you on a good day,
Yeah.
right? So what do? You suck it up and you do your job. Um, Typically in the past, the standing treatment for guys that were having problems with stress was alcohol use. There's a huge alcohol problem amongst a lot of first responders. Some of those have morphed into drug use problems, losing careers, and that kind of thing. I had my own struggles with mental health. Right after I got started in the fire service, we had Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was a responder to Hurricane Katrina. And I went down there and I
Mm.
spent a week. It was actually my part-time job. I was working for the medical examiner's office.
Wow.
So I went down there and I spent a week pulling bodies out of the water.
Wow.
That's the only thing I did. I wasn't there. There was a couple of people that we found that were stuck in their houses. We were able to help get out, kind of like as more of a rescue. But my main purpose for being there that week was for recovery.
Wow.
Um, so when I got back from that, that was I was young, early
Yeah.
20s. You
Yeah.
know, um, I had never been exposed to something like that before. I was new in my career. I knew that bad things happened, but there's a difference between knowing that and seeing that,
Right.
right? And experiencing that. When I got back, I struggled. I was unable to take a shower because every time I took a shower, when I opened the shower curtain, the same dead lady was laying outside of my shower.
Man.
So she was always there. It was the same lady, real as you and I are talking. I could see her laying there. So I tried to reach out to get some help then, but there wasn't really anybody out there that dealt with that for first responders. So the best that my employee assistance program at the time could provide me with, after a 2-week search, initially they sent me to see a minister that was a chaplain for a fire department. He didn't really have any idea what to do with it. They did find a counselor for me to go to. She had no idea what to do with that. She gave me a CD, and on the CD, it said breathe, just in cursive white letters. And she said, well, whenever you experience these anxiety attacks, just listen to the CD. It'll help you breathe through it. And I was like, oh, okay,
Wow.
and then she said, thanks for stopping by. And that was the last time I ever went to a counselor. I was so mad after that. I left there and I was like, you know what? I'm never doing this again. I'm going to do what they taught me, and I'm going to suck it up, shut it down. So I did that for about 13 years. And here just a couple of years ago, things were getting really bad at home. I spent my entire day, when not at work, trying to run away from and keep from thinking about the things that were in my head. It took effect on my marriage, on my life with my kids. I couldn't handle the stress of them being crazy in the evenings. So there was an evening my wife stopped me, put her hand on my chest, and she said, stop. And after that conversation, I reached out and got help. And that's when I learned about processing trauma. Processing trauma after you've been through the event, and techniques of resiliency to utilize during an event, whether it's at work or in your personal life, to move through those things and to come out as a better person on the other side, instead of somebody that's just holding those things in and trying to suppress them.
Wow. You're involved or received some training from a group here in Tarrant County, the Readiness Group.
Yep.
And you use that word resiliency.
Yep.
So you went through that process for yourself. You became an instructor through the Readiness Group.
Yep.
The techniques that you've learned, can you share? Are they techniques that just a regular everyday person can take advantage of?
Absolutely.
To deal with, it doesn't have to be a traumatic experience, but just sometimes just daily life stressors can really come down hard on you.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about this, is that if you understand how trauma works, right, and what happens in your mind when you go through a traumatic event, and you learn on the backside of that ways to combat that, all of a sudden it's really simple. And when I first learned these things, I spent a lot of time going, man, why haven't I been doing this for 15 years? I mean, what was stopping me from doing this? And it was just a lack of understanding. So number one, I'll take it from two different approaches. We can talk about like working through trauma first, and then talk about kind of like your everyday stuff. So after a traumatic event, the number one thing to clean your plate of those things that you witnessed during that traumatic event, it's pretty simple. You're supposed to talk about it. And when I say talk about it, I don't mean talk about it from a point of what I should have done, what I could have done better, what I didn't do, right? That's not the kind of conversation you need to have. The conversation that we're talking about is, if you approach that picture in your mind, or that scenario that you went through, from the aspect of one of your five senses, right? What did you smell? Was there something that you saw that stood out? Was there something that you heard that stood out? When you talk about those things, the way that you can move trauma to just becoming like a memory is you have to correlate one of your senses to it. During a traumatic event, the front part of your brain shuts off. And that's that executive function, right? And so you're not processing those senses at that time. Your brain is still receiving them, but you're not processing them. So if you go back and talk about that event, and I talk when I talk to first responders, one of the things that I can tell them is I can say one word and everybody in the room knows exactly the smell that I'm talking about. And the smell is of an airbag after a wreck. It has a very distinct smell to the powder. And if you talk about an airbag, I promise you, every first responder, police, fire, EMS, instantly they can smell it in their nose. They know what it is. And that's what we're talking about. If you talk about that event from, man, this sound, one of the things that happened to me in Katrina, for example, when I got that for years, I hated goats. Anything to do with a goat, I hated them. And I had no idea why. I hated them. So when I was going through therapy, one of the things that I found that was a trigger for me was the sound of a goat. And the reason was when we were on our boats floating up and down these residential streets looking for bodies, there were all these goats that had been blown in by the storm that were standing on top of houses doing their stupid goat scream.
Wow.
Like there's yelling, right?
Sounds like Silence of the Lambs.
So, yeah. So I never paid attention to that because I was in a traumatic event. I was in that fight or flight mode for a week. The prefrontal cortex was completely shut down in my mind. I'm still receiving that information, but I'm not logging it anywhere, or doing anything with it. So once I put those things together, of oh man, I heard these goats that were standing on these roofs. Then all of a sudden, that was no longer a trigger for me. I didn't have a response of like anger every time I heard a goat because I understood what that was. So, and then we talk about the resiliency aspect, right? Like the day-to-day stuff. I do this with my patients all the time that are having anxiety attacks that call ambulances. And there's two simple things that are really easy to do. There's a lot, but two of them are really simple. One is box breathing. Box breathing is actually a technique that's taught in the military, right? Snipers use it. Special forces guys use it. It's become, it's morphed all the way into professional athletes that are using it, along with heart math to control heart rate and those types of things. Yeah. And it's a simple process. It's easy to start about 4 seconds, and you take a breath in that lasts 4 seconds while you're breathing in, and then you hold that breath for 4 seconds. Then you exhale over 4 seconds, and you hold for 4 seconds. And you do that in a box, right? And what that does is it gives you time to reset and re-engage. It's a cognitive function. It's something that you're forcing yourself to do. And you can actually bring a whole lot of calmness to your anxiety just by doing your box breathing. The other one that I love is gratitudes. So expressing gratitude, the only place that gratitude comes from in your mind is from your prefrontal cortex, the part that's shut off during trauma. So let's say that you're on that downward spiral, right? The whole world's looking terrible. Everything is going wrong. What can I do to stop these feelings? All you have to do is be thankful for something. And the cool thing about it is you don't actually have to be thankful for something. You can fake it, because just to speak about being grateful has to re-engage your prefrontal cortex.
Interesting.
So you can fake it until you make it. I mean, it works 100% of the time and immediately stops that downward spiral. Next time you're upset with somebody, if you're having an argument, something like that, tell them you're thankful for something, or be thankful for that person, right? And it'll stop the conversation. Like it pauses, and somebody else that's having a bad day, hearing you talk about gratitude, can actually change their thought processes as well. So I use that at home with my kids when the dinner table is crazy, right? And it's bouncing around and
Yeah, I don't have those days.
yeah, imagine that. Uh, we we I tell the boys, I'm like, all right, what are we thankful for? And everybody at the table does 3 things that they're thankful for and why they're thankful for those things. And I cannot describe to you how much it changes the atmosphere all around you. The entire energy of the room changes.
That's awesome.
So,
Wow. Well, listen, Ben, we're going to wrap things up here, but listen, I really appreciate what you've shared with us today. And I'd like to get you back on sometime and maybe do a video on trauma wound care,
yeah,
how to use a tourniquet and things like that. So, but anyhow, again, thank you so much. And I know there's a lot more that we could get into about resiliency and just having that mindset. But we're going to go ahead and sign off for now. And folks, I just want to encourage you to do what's right, be merciful, and be humble. See y'all later.